So again, welcome to our roundtable. We're grateful that you were able to join us today for this important topic. During the roundtable today, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. As we go along, we'll try to address them, if not during the webinar, when we get to the end of the webinar. For those of you who didn't already sign up in the Google form, we will post it in the chat as well. I'm happy to be with you today. My name is George Edwards. I'm the Chief Accreditation Officer at the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. The host for today's roundtable is Dr. Christoph Ott. Christoph is a member of the board of the Lausanne American School and Director of Quality Schools Certificate, a Swiss-based quality certificate certification program for schools. He has extensive enrollment management experience in international markets and guiding organizations to achieve long-term goals. Forward-thinking and innovative strategic thinker with an ability to build cross-functional teams, develop comprehensive programs, and improve service quality. Excellent interpersonal skills and effective collaborator with students and adults, skilled at introducing new and innovative ideas into secondary education and implementing them through empowerment, motivation, and inspiration. So with that introduction, it's my pleasure to turn things over to our host for today, Christoph, who will get things started. Christoph?
Thank you very, very much, George, for this warm and thoughtful introduction. So let me share a few words for my co-host, about my co-host, George. So George already mentioned that he is the Chief Accreditation Officer of the New England Association of Schools and Colleges, where he assists schools throughout New England and around the world in the process of continuous improvement by participating in accreditation. George was a public school educator in the USA, serving as a high school principal for over 20 years. George was the founding principal of several schools, including some explicitly designed around the NEASC standards. George lives in Sanape, New Hampshire. So let me maybe give you the inception story of this roundtable. George was my host at the NEASC annual conference a little or less than a year ago. And at that conference, I was presenting planning in the times of crisis, which consisted of lessons learned around strategic thinking and strategic planning at the Lausanne American School, which is what we did for the whole COVID year. In parallel to that, I had been conducting a number of interviews of heads of schools and school leaders around the world, some of which are on this call, such as Chris. Thank you for joining us again. And so I tried to, in the presentation, come up with kind of those few lessons learned that are hopefully applicable to everybody. But as we were preparing for this presentation, George and I kind of came up with a conclusion, which was schools will either reinvent the wheel, which is what we did at LAS, or they will get outside resources, consultants to help them in the strategic planning and thinking process. But they don't really seem to speak with each other. So out of this, we decided to start these strategy roundtable discussions. This is our fourth one. We've covered a number of topics. And what I do is I will send to all of you who are on the mailing list the recording and the resources shared by the presenters. And if you want to hear of any other recordings of previous recordings, I'll be glad to share those with you. And maybe towards the end of the presentation, George will put up the Google form for those of you who have not shared your contact information with us as of yet. But before we dive into the discussion, I'd like to introduce our panelists, which I'm very, very grateful for joining us today. So I'll start with Paul Magnuson, who's not just a colleague, but also a good friend. Paul attributes his progressive take on education to over 20 years of summer camp, Concordia Language Villages, Middlebury, and Lausanne American School, where we actually worked very, very closely and intensely together. In addition to teaching and administrative experiences across all grades, he's been a member of a U.S. school board, a state bureaucrat for school improvement, a university researcher, and adjunct professor. His area of interest include professional development, pulling agile into education, language education, and alternative schooling. Next January, Paul is publishing his fourth book, Is This Right? And this is a children's book. So Paul, thank you for joining us. And you are currently sitting in Verbier, Switzerland, if I'm not mistaken.
That's exactly right. Thanks for having me.
Our next panelist is Sean Lusher, who is talking to us from California. And Sean is an American Educational Research Associate, awarded scholarly practitioner in the field of action research and sciences with over 30 years of experience. He began his career as an educator as a teacher's aide at the age of 17. A path that led to PK to 12 teaching, adjunct professorship, administrative work, and cabinet level school district leadership in a diverse group of settings, schools, and educational systems, domestically and abroad. For his lifetime achievement as an educator and social change agent, Dr. Lusher was named one of 16 worldwide TED-Ed Innovative Educator awardees for 2019. He currently serves as the Chief Operating Officer of a large school district with a focus on the redevelopment of school facilities for excellence and innovation. He continues to be a much sought after speaker on the topic of education, design thinking in social sciences, and leadership. And thank you especially, Sean, for joining us at an awfully early hour your time, because it's pre-7 o'clock for you. So thank you very much.
An honor.
Okay, our last panelist, Jonathan Ball. Jonathan graduated from the Manlius Pebble University, Pebble Hill School, sorry for that, DeWitt, New York, and from the University of Wisconsin-Madison with a BA in history. At Carney Sando, a search firm, since 1997, Jonathan has served as placement associate, associate director of recruitment and member services, director of recruitment and school services, and director of marketing. He was promoted to managing associate in 2005 and has been conducting development, advancement, and communication search work since 2010. Jonathan has chaired a resume critique and job search strategy panel at Columbia University Teachers College and was a speaker at the doctoral symposium at Stanford University on careers in independent education. He was a keynote speaker on the job search strategies in the K-12 educational market experiences national conference and presented multiple times at the CASE NAIS annual conference on advancement, office structure and strategy, in addition to speaking at multiple regional and national events. Jonathan was the director of advancement for the Gardner Carney Leadership Institute from 2005 until 2018. Thank you very much for being with us, Jonathan. So let me maybe frame the conversation today a little bit, and I'll start with a picture. My background is engineering, and if George, if you can go to the next slide, please. My background comes out of engineering, and one of the things I learned there very early in logistics was just in time. Just in time is very well known. In the 80s, Toyota made this very, very popular, where they really created an extremely efficient way of running everything. And just in time basically means what it means. When you're producing something or doing something, whatever you need to make it happen arrives just in time. Having been in Mexico since last year, or was in Mexico last year, now in Switzerland, I discovered another logistical paradigm, which is called just in case. And just in case is where you have very fragile supply chains and you have to be ready for disruption. So whereas just in time is really, really focused on, reducing waste and gaining efficiency and maximizing your return on investment, just in case is really here to keep company inventories and avoid disruption. And I wanted to use that as an analogy, as I will point to you in the next slide, of education and strategy. Whereas on one hand, just in time is intellectually amazing. I mean, for me, I love finding ways to make things more efficient. I'm just wired that way. But at the same time, this has a space in education. But truly, when you're thinking about something as messy, iterative, and human-centric as strategy, you need to work much more in a just-in-case paradigm. And just in case will mean that you will build in things for disruptions, for mistakes, and for being able to backpedal when you need to, because it is a trial and error kind of an approach. And that is what the strategic thinking and implementation process is all about. That does beg the question, though, and with that being said, I'll pass it on to Paul, is how does this work in reality? How does this work in reality when you are a person on the ground trying to shift the culture of a community? How does this work when you're a person on the school district level trying to do the same thing? And how does this work when you are a person looking at a school from the outside, like Carney Sando and Jonathan would be doing? So with that being said, I'd like to hand it over to Paul and let him tell us a little bit what his thoughts are on this.
Perfect. In true Swiss fashion, Christoph, you are exactly on time for when you said things would happen. So that's quite good. Radek and Jeff have joined us since we said hellos in the chat. So hello to you and welcome, and thanks for being here too. And then I have one of my colleagues here from Verbier in the room with me. Just so you know, if I'm looking over here, it's because I'm looking at someone who's participating, not because I'm distracted or checking out when the next train is coming or so on. So one of my areas that I really love is professional development, like working with people as they grow and learn and discover and get better at what they're doing. And, you know, just that feeling of like uplifting folks from the experiences that they generate themselves. And so I've become, I think, over the years, more and more of a proponent for bottom-up approaches. There's always some top-down and bottom-up as well. It's not black and white, but I definitely like this particular approach of bottom-up, trying to support people as they find their own way in their professional development. So that's what I'll talk about today. So if you can give me the next slide there. Here's a couple of our students from Copperfield on the right. And if you want more information about me, you can look at Ed Studio. It's got about my children's books, but then also a little bit about consulting and so on. Okay, so there's actually 3 reasons I want to say for this bottom-up approach. One of them, and probably the most important, is from the literature we know about professional development to a great extent, and what makes for a good professional development. And that's autonomous, collaborative, ongoing, and classroom-based work. Like, we know that that's needed, and to have those things, collaboration, and have to have something that's ongoing and have it based in the classroom. It's quite difficult to do those and meet those requirements in a forum like this right here, right? So if we want teachers to be growing, we want them to be able to do it in an ongoing basis with other teachers in their classroom. That means we can't really be presenting to them to get them to grow. Some presentation, yes, it's okay, but we really need the bottoms up as well. The second reason for that I'm going to talk about is this series of PD programs that we've done. Christoph knows about them from the start, when he created at LAS a research center so that we could pursue various projects. And at the beginning, we really focused on technology and building some apps and working on things that we thought would support teacher professional growth in the classroom. I think we got many things right back then, Christoph. We had a nice focus on teachers doing their own work and so on, and having choice, but we were also a little bit tighter on sort of having the idea of what they should be learning, as opposed to allowing them to find the spaces in their own teaching where they wanted to improve, and then using that motivation to actually make it classroom-based and ongoing and autonomous, right? So we got much more over the last decade focused on process instead of being focused on the particular things we wanted to teach. So we had a better process. We knew that there was going to be learning, but we had less control over what the learning was actually going to be. But we knew that teachers in general were going to be growing in a direction that what they felt was appropriate for them. The other reason I'm really gotten into bottom up is an effort over the last 8 years that Tom on the call today knows very well. We've been pulling agility into education. And agility, I'll talk about just a little bit for background. It's something you've probably heard about. It's quite familiar to folks coming out of an IT world, but increasingly out of other areas as well. If you can move forward, George. So I have a slide here of the original document of some software developers who got together. They were banging their heads basically on the wall, and 20 years ago, they said there has to be a better way. And they were trying to answer the problem of somebody told us that they needed this thing. We got all the information. We thought we had everything right. We worked really hard. We put this thing together. And then when we gave it to them as a finished product, they said, well, no, that's not actually what I wanted, right? And so they got very much into the pattern of looking for small iterations with lots of feedback along the way. And you can see where this is heading into education, from an individual teacher's classroom to administration in a school. You want iterations and feedback all the time so that you're constantly adjusting. It's that thing of, for a teacher, of having a lesson plan, but absolutely being able to throw it out or modify it as you go. And if you don't, you're in trouble, right? Same way with any sort of initiative introducing in school, you got to have plenty of feedback so you can respond to change, work with those people you have around you, the students you have around you, the teachers that you have, and then really focusing on getting some value. That's that working software. You want to get some value out of what you're doing. So we took this, and if you move a slide forward, you'll see that a couple of us at LAS worked to turn this into something we called Edgility. We have a couple of chapters on this that I can share for resources. I don't have them here, but I can share if you'd like. You can see the parallels with the manifesto for the folks that were originally interested in agility. And we've really focused on exploration, growth, self-regulation, and learning that actually supports additional learning. So what we call life-worthy learning, stealing that from David Perkins. This is what we want for our kids, but if we don't have this for our teachers as well, then we're going to get ourselves into a situation of, or maybe a culture of do as I say, not as I do. We really need teachers to be living this idea of exploration, growth, and self-regulation. That means for me, anyway, for professional development, we can't be turning to them and saying, here's what you're going to do, or here's an outsider who doesn't have our school context, who's now going to lay down how we're going to deliver this new curriculum and so on. There may be room for that at certain times, right? And fidelity of some sort of implementation of something new. But for real sustained growth, we have to turn it over to the teachers. And it turns out that they're all professionals, right? And they're all leaders in their classroom. They've all got a lot of training and a lot to say. We just got to figure out a process for them to be able to say it. If you move on one more, I think I have 2 slides left here. This is nothing revolutionary for education. Sorry, I'm having trouble with my own slide here. In the Model Core Teaching Standards from NEASC, this came from the leaders of education from each state in the US. It's, you know, it's common. It's like, let's get in this action research cycle and let's try things out. Let's see where we go with it. Let's reflect back about it. Let's go back to the literature and see if what we are learning is reflected there. And we'll continue on. With graduate students that I work with, there's often that feeling of this should be a straight line. Like, I'm going to get done with my master's and I'm going to know what to do. And it's sort of disappointing when they realize, and we all realize, we don't get to that point, because like Marsano says, we all can use a lot of different methods and they all can be effective, and we can use all those methods and they can be ineffective too. We have to find our own way. We can't believe that somehow we've got the answer and we're going to now have it scripted and have teachers follow that and we're okay. We got to get them out feeling their own way and keeping track of what they're doing, sharing it with others and so on. So the last slide, I always tell students, if you're in the middle of that circle, that's where you have arrived. That's a good place to be. Here at Copperfield now, based on lots and lots of time at Lausanne American School as well, we're looking at building a project where we're taking essentially what we've developed at LAS. We call them resident scholars, our own teachers who have picked year-long action research projects within their own classes to work on, to publish, to present, to write blogs about, to help them network with other people who are doing similar things. We're taking that and we're trying to support multiple schools or create a network of schools that are able to do this. So the idea currently is that we have a point person in different schools, not that that point person is the action researcher, but that the point person develops processes that work in that particular school for their particular setting. So we're not replicating a program that already exists, but we're using what we've learned from being successful with this in one school to help other schools come along. And I think it's still in that same agile spirit of we're looking at collaboration over telling, of process over content, being pragmatic, delivering value over being prescriptive and sticking to the guidelines. And then really what NEASC might appreciate here is really looking at the impact, the outcomes, right? It's like what teachers are able to do and how that and if that transfers to students we're looking for, not the inputs, not like what professional development we've delivered in a box we can tick, but what are the teachers actually working on, thinking about, and getting better with, because they know that that's something that they should be working on. So that's my pitch for do bottom up when you can within your school and support folks who are thinking that way. There's a tremendous amount to gain from it. And I think I have a few minutes for questions.
Great, Paul, and thanks for making the link to NEASC and our focus on impacts. It's a really important point. Any questions from anyone?
I think I'd like just to make a comment. And first of all, I know Paul and Sean, if you guys do not speak together after this panel discussion, because you have so many overlaps in your interests, I would be highly surprised. Let's put it that way. But I guess, yeah, it's really, really funny because ultimately agility is really hard because it goes against so many of our instincts. And that what makes it really hard. And ultimately, it's in the context that the magic, respectively, the disaster happens. So the reality of the theory is very, I at least feel I get it. The using that on a day-to-day basis is really, really hard. And that is where I'm going to maybe make a quick pitch here for the next roundtable topic, which is super in line with what you're saying, Paul, is it's tight versus loose leadership. It's kind of like the fish starts rotting on the head versus, it's Woodstock and free for all, to use, a little bit of a silly analogy here. So it's an ongoing tension of push and pull, basically. But I love have the courage to be imperfect. Trust me, I've been looking at this picture a lot lately because I found this so impactful.
Yep, the little piece there is really that happens to be the motto over here, but it's something that we say, right? Like learn from your mistakes, failing forward, all of that. We don't construct school, frankly, to support that very well. We talk about it, but we really don't construct school to support that. But if we turn it over to our teachers and give them some space, we can start pushing school perhaps, or pulling school a little bit in that direction. And then it just shows the action research cycle there, like get into that mode of you're constantly reflecting on what you do, whether it's in one lesson or over a period of time, whatever it might be. Okay, I get all fired up, but thanks for listening to me. I'm very.
No, does any of the other panelists would like to comment on this, or do you have like an elegant transition, Sean? Because you can take it from there.
I'm not sure elegant translation is the way to go. I will say, I appreciate your presentation, Paul, and the cultural issues that you're speaking to. And I do believe in many ways as educators, we've set a tone in our very practices in schools that don't lend themselves particularly well to this embracing of trying and failing. I mean, from our grading practices, which typically are an induction process into a deficit-based system. You can think back to your first spelling tests and your results, which typically on a 10-question spelling test were marked -3 or -4, not +6 or +7. Down to our report card structures, which, talk about, A, B, C, Ds, and Fs. And you rarely went home to your parents waving a report card with straight F saying, look at how much I'm going to be learning in the future. These are not the sort of things that we've inducted or been inducted to ourselves in. So it can be really difficult to have some of these conversations around change, whether it be classroom change, school site change, district change, or societal change, because we've been inducted into a system that teaches us that failure is to be avoided at all costs, rather than innovation is a failure process. And you're going to have to embrace that. So that would be as close as I can come to an elegant transition based upon our outstanding presenter, Paul. Well, thank you so much, Christoph and George, for having us and bringing us all together. My name is Sean Lozier. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Vista Unified School District in San Diego, California. It's a large school district encapsulating both preschool, K through 12, and adult education. There are 29 school site locations serving over 30,000 students, depending upon the year. So what I've been asked to reflect upon is some of my experiences inside of district-led initiatives. I will say this, having led school site initiatives for change, which is how I came into contact with George and the Center for Secondary School Redesign, along with our friends in New England at the Association of Schools and Colleges. And I'm just going to share some items from my perspective. I don't profess to have any golden bullets, and I say that with a positive notion, because I think part of the issue in education is we do show up a lot of times and say, if you just do this, this other thing will happen, change will have occurred, and off we go. You're done with the change process. That's all there is to it. So why don't we go ahead and give a quick overview about, sort of working on a group of schools and district level. How do we best support change from afar? And then how do we deal with the resource question to support change initiatives? And I think on both of these, I may have not necessarily anything new, but a few new spins to offer on some thoughts for those. So let's go ahead and look at the next slide. I'm going to start by a notion of saying it is important for a system-wide change to create an understanding of both what the system is and what change is. And I think one of the things we need to be very careful about as we introduce this is to not select theories that might not be the most appropriate for a social setting. So I want to put this and frame it in context. You may hear a lot of people talk about ideas from manufacturing regarding things they've learned in total quality management or Lean Six Sigma or a number of other items. These are important concepts to use inside of education in the right areas. I don't want to have an IT system supporting 40,000 students or 80,000 accounts that is down 3% of the time. So I'm going to use Lean Six Sigma with my IT department to make sure that we achieve a result where we're up 98.998% of the time. But that's a manufacturing concept that isn't necessarily appropriate to apply to humans. Because as humans, we're social creatures. We act differently. We're not widgets inside of a system. So when we talk about creating an understanding of systems, it's finding a system that makes sense within our context. And in this case, all I did was select Thomas Kuhn's system for scientific revolutions, which is a social system base that talks about, we have societal norms, we embrace accepted facts. Facts change over time. I know that that's hard for some of us to embrace sometimes, but we learn new things and facts change. We're engaged in common practices. You can attribute this to either Kuhn or Wagner's community of practice theory, that we have common practices and that there's responsible groups for those practices. And that leads to a process of normal science. And that's what we do day in, day out. But as we talk about having different facts presented to us, we enter this process of model drift. We question what we do. So it's important to introduce new facts, but allow people the space to contemplate those and really look at those deeply. And if there are enough new facts that present a compelling reason why maybe the normal science of what we're doing isn't the most practical, the model naturally drifts into model crisis, which leads to a revolution of what we're doing, which leads to that paradigm change that we're seeking, which leads to a new normal science. The danger here is to present this as a one-off thing. This isn't a one-off thing. And that's why I think what Paul talked about and what I think you'll see in the upcoming slides, talking about action research and continuous change is really important. And I've already said I'm here in California, and we understand in California the concept of why change is important over time in a different way. You see, because here in California, we have catastrophic earthquakes. And that's what happens in education a lot of the time. If we don't change over time, we build up all that energy for change, and then it gets released in these catastrophic events that ends up knocking down buildings and everything, rather than embracing a gradual process over time. So I do think this is the first thing from a systems perspective, is you have to do that and create a compelling discussion about that. Can we go ahead and move on to the next slide? In looking at a long-range vision for change in the future, I think one of the most important things is to acknowledge that change happens over time, and that you create a compelling why focused on a moral imperative around students and children and a more important or brighter future for us all. But that moral imperative, there's a grind. We want it today. But if you put into place a system that tries to achieve it right now, the system will fall apart. That's not how it works. It has to happen over time. So when we're talking about a vision for the future, you really need to be looking at a vision about 10 years out. And that's really painful, because we all want the best for our students right now. And so we're now in a process of selling out an idea of why we're making things better for children in the future. And that can be really difficult for the results we want to seek and find right now. And we don't want that to happen. Now, that long-range vision of the future from a systems perspective has to represent some form of distribution to normal science that will put in a model drift, which will occur over time, which will lead to that systems crisis, which is a good thing, which then introduces new practice into the system. The thing to do is to remember that we are dealing with people here, and we need to deliver with them small early wins. Okay, and we know this naturally about ourselves and people, that this is important. And I'll give a quick example to this. We all applaud early wins when it comes to adolescent and child development or anything else. Just think about this for a moment. If you had a child that didn't know how to walk, the first time you saw the child walk, you would applaud wildly, but you wouldn't do that for a day-to-day event for a 25-year-old. Let's have some early wins. Let's celebrate those early wins and make them achievable so people can feel a sense of accomplishment and movement. And that's not placating. That's setting the table to broader change and to supporting them. Now, I'm going to touch upon this on the last slide, but I do want to say that the change needs to be funded appropriately. It can neither be over or underfunded. If it's overfunded, people associate the change with a change in funding model. And if the funding is to be backed off, they say the change is unsustainable. If it's underfunded, it becomes something that isn't possible to achieve, and you've asked the impossible, and you may even get some early wins, but you'll burn out the change agents in the system in the process, and they're not going to pick up and take things forward. I do believe it's imperative to create a practical framework for change. And I'll give an example of a simple practical framework, but it's a practical framework for local schools and teachers to make decisions, because the system cannot make a decision for everybody. And we know this as educators. When the classroom door goes closed, the teachers have to make decisions in real time. You cannot make decisions for them based upon that, but you can help create a decision matrix or a paradigm for way to make decisions so we can make better decisions. And the final thing is something that's going to seem a little counterintuitive to everything we've studied, probably in many different systems about change, which is, I know we love strategic plans, and strategic plans are important with actionable items on timelines and everything else, but there's an old saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. If you're not addressing your organizational culture first and foremost, your strategic planning will not matter. Focus on the core values that you expect people to be embracing and how we see that manifested in daily action, and address those items on an ongoing basis. And your systems leaders, from the superintendent and chief's office all the way through our school site principals and our teacher leaders, they have to model that culture. Otherwise, we're just not going to get there. So why don't we go ahead and move over to the next slide now. Now, I'm going to just present this as one that I happen to have used. I'm not suggesting this would be the right one for anybody. In fact, I am suggesting don't use this one in particular. Find one that works for you. But you do need to adopt some form of innovation framework or decision-making matrix that is able to guide discussions on the ground. You need to make sure that when that is being implemented, you go slow at first to get those decisions right and have the difficult conversations up first. It will pay off over time where you'll be able to go quicker. You need to do something that feels counterintuitive as a district or system. And that counterintuitiveness says that there is a way to get things done, and it's the district way. You need to be able to create local adoption systems and support that schools and classrooms will adopt these things differently. I do advocate for action research as being firmly embedded in the social sciences and in education sciences as a means of systemic and ongoing change. Whether those be shorter cycles of action research or longer cycles of action research, I leave that to the systems to determine what's most appropriate at the time. But what I say, what's most important in that action research cycle is the part that we don't often do in action research, which is make sure that we do the report out and sharing at the end, even if it's in informal writing. And in that process, you need to acknowledge failure and success. And you need to celebrate and reward both. You need to reward the people that put in their best and failed and celebrate them on par with those that put in their best and succeeded. We're rewarding the ability to embrace change. We're not rewarding necessarily the result because we know failure will occur. Why don't we go ahead and look at the next slide, which is the final one that talks just a bit about resourcing for our ecosystem. Now, when I talk about a district, you're not talking about a singular structure. You're talking about many different schools. So you're talking about an ecosystem and a cultural ecosystem and a bureaucratic institution that has policies and ways of doing things that you need to balance out what you're trying to achieve. So if you're looking at those long-range plans, I again advocate that you cannot overfund or underfund a change initiative. Again, overfunding equates the money to the change, and if we adopt change successfully, change will happen in a cycle. The funding will start to go back to a normal model. The change should be able to be sustained. And then the funding goes towards the next wave and cycle of change to perpetuate things along. So what you need to be able to do is look at the complete system and use a balanced framework or a balanced approach to systems design. So for resource conditions, we're talking about what are our sustainable models for financing money, what are the grant cycles, what are ways that we can increase efficiency within our resource conditions, everything down to what is the long range plan for replacing furniture in the classroom. What are those resource conditions? For systems dynamics, we're talking about our daily operations, how we approach them, what it is we're going to touch on them. For integration and growth, we're talking about addressing our top priority goals, not what we typically do in education of having a ton of goals and trying to achieve all of them together. Clearly articulating what are 1, 2, 3 top priority goals in the annual or biannual cycles that we're trying to do, and how do we support innovation and learning and growth among our collective bodies, so that way that's part of what we're doing as well. And then finally, how do we gather our metrics for community experience, not just in terms of what students are experiencing, that is important and must be there, what our parents, what our larger communities experience, and what our teacher and classified staff are experiencing. So we're looking across that ecosystem design. So Christoph, I'll turn it back over to you, but that is my quick overview of how we've been looking things at a district level, and several districts that I've worked at. It's not reflective necessarily of where I am today, but that's my own opinions over the course of time at working at several school districts.
Well, Sean, thank you so much. I mean, this, you said so many things so to the point. And I think my key takeaway in what you just said, and I'm really looking forward to the fireside chat afterwards, and I'm really looking forward to sharing the recording with as many people as possible afterwards, because there's so much value in just and we still have Jonathan coming, but just so far what we've heard, this is so impactful. But I think for me, what the key takeaway is this way of seeing the world that I have of levels of analysis, where you have an organism, person, teacher, and then you take it up to the system. And in your case, it's even a district. It's not even a school. It's a bunch of schools. And when you use that level of analysis analogy, and you combine that with Angela Duckworth's framework around grit, and like talent times effort equals skill, and skill times effort equals achievement. Well, you can apply this to yourself as a person. You can apply this to a system, and ultimately, one of the things that really resonated with what you said is you celebrate the effort, not the result. And because that's the core of that piece. It's talent times effort and skill times effort, and then you got achievement of it. So that was amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So Jonathan, why don't you take it off?
Great. And yeah, thank you to Paul and Sean and Christoph and George for putting this together today. When Christoph and I first talked about this session, the kind of the just in time versus just in case, and kind of the contradictory, or the heads that they hit there, and those two concepts were interesting. So I simply I took a macro micro level approach, and everything that Sean was just talking about is on point, and I'll probably unpack a little bit further from a macro level of a market view of my vantage point of talking with literally hundreds of heads of schools and leaders from many different institutions all across the country and varying sizes and across the world as well. If George, you can move forward to the slide, that'd be great. So I went quite simple and easy, and I was like, okay, let's talk about efficiency. And then I was going to talk about preparedness, and then change management. And efficiency is all, and as we were just talking, is all kind of it's all the small things, right? It's doing things to focus on the process, and that is kind of in the moment. And you're doing all the small pieces of the work that lead to what is the preparedness, the kind of the just in case, right? And I'm going to bounce back and forth. George, if you can move forward to preparedness. Right, preparedness, if you look at the bottom part of that, I mean, preparedness, right, that's a strategic plan for an institution. I mean, it's huge. It's research, it's estimation, it's planning, it's resourcing, it's education, it's practicing, it's rehearsing. It's all these things, and that's a massive enterprise, right? And in schools and institutions look for it all the time. And somebody put in the chat earlier that the long horizon, or the big view, or the big strategic plan is what everybody focuses on. It's the next big thing, or in my world, a lot of times it's the big capital campaign. And that's the just in case, if you will, for the organization. But going back to everything that Sean and Paul and really Christoph have been pointing out, is that efficiency is the day-to-day. It's what's going to set up the organization to actually deliver on the preparedness, right? And that the quote that Sean also said, that culture eats strategy, 100%. And from an organizational standpoint, that people don't they get together, they put together the strategic plan, they hire consultants, and they set forth this great vision. And they know they can get there as an institution, but they haven't done a lot of the efficiency work, the day-to-day work, the evaluation work of actually the components and the culture inside that organism, whether it be an individual or be an institution made of many individuals. And so what we do culturally, very typically, and as again the chat said, that people focus on the horizon, the long term, the preparedness. Think about, unfortunately, Hurricane Ian, right? We showed that there's thousands of power trucks ready to go to come in. We focus on the preparedness. We don't focus on the process most of the time, or the components that make up the process, the efficiency, because that's the hard work, right? So if you can go forward a slide, George, that'd be great. And so we often define success by the end goal, by the preparedness, like how well were we prepared, or how awesome was our strategic plan and our vision. And that's how we define success. We don't typically, as a society or as an institution or even as a person, define success by the process, the system that got us to the end, right? And they can live in harmony with one another, but you can't get to the end without that efficiency, right? And so, efficiency is hard because it requires daily maintenance. It requires a culture of efficiency, basically, which is hard to do with everything going on in all of our lives, right? So we as a company, Carney Sandro, recently read a book by James Clear, Atomic Habits, and it's really focused on an individual. And I have a little cheat sheet that I can have Christoph send out, after the presentation, but it's really again, going back to some of the stuff that Sean was talking about, it's either, typically our habits they're positive or negative. Either you failed or you didn't. It's black or white. Either you got an A or an F. That's not a great way to, it's a great way to discourage growth, a growth mindset, right? And so you need to kind of think about your own individual mindset, but also your organization and your institution, your school's mindset before you even start to think about change management or goal-oriented or their preparedness or the strategic plan aspect. The other thing that all the presenters before me talked about is small adjustments equal massive transformation. I think I actually wrote, Sean also said small early wins, right? Also gradual process over time. James Clear is quick to point out, if you changed one simple habit 1% a day, you have a 37% increase in whatever that habit is, whether it be health or whatever, drinking or running or walking or whatever it is that you're looking to do. So focusing on the immediate to ultimately create massive change institutionally is what many would say is the way to get there. And you're also focusing on the individual and the cultural growth, kind of growth mindset again of the institution. So, again, he goes on to quickly point out that, as I already mentioned, goal-driven success ignores the process. System-driven success concentrates on the habits, and that's the habits of an individual, but also of the institution. So before, I think Christoph mentioned, before, or actually, and Sean talking about, before your institution even goes into a strategic plan, you really have to take stock of the kind of the culture. Are you a system? Are you focusing on the system that drives the success? Are you really, in a way, if you're going to change, are you that small adjustments equal massive transformation organization? Are you nimble? Are you entrepreneurial? Are you able to fail forward, knowing that small adjustments, they equal massive transformation, but they're not going to happen overnight. And also, the nice thing about that too is if you fail a little bit on a small adjustment, it's not this massive failure, right? Like you can kind of hide it and pick up the next day and improve too. which is a great thing about just incremental learning in teaching in the first place. So I tried to, and George, you go to the last slide. And so again, this is kind of his rubric on how to, and this is for an individual, but I think it's very real for an organization as well. And again, I have the cheat sheet from James Clear that I can share with everybody. But I really think it's a great, when you're thinking about, okay, if preparedness is our strategic plan or our objective or the long horizon, or again, in our culture where it's the end goal or our success, if you will, right? Then looking at that efficiency, and efficiency is that day-to-day, what makes us, what makes us a smooth, great operating machine. Look inside ourselves and what we need to do to make small incremental changes inside that efficiency system to deliver the bigger goal, right? And so I love that quote, is that you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall down to the level of your systems, right? And so then, again, the points that he has, they're reverses of each other, right? How to create a good habit is make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying. How to make it a bad habit is out of sight, out of mind, right? You make it unattractive, and you make it difficult, and you make it unsatisfying. And again, they step out more, through Clear's work. He steps out a broader process on how you can do each one of those kind of one of those buckets. And then, so I really think that organizations need to focus on the system of the entire organization, but actually also the systems of the individuals in that organization before going on any massive endeavor to make a prepared goal or a strategic goal or a capital campaign. What I've actually seen recently, and this is actually in the past year or two, with strategic plans and also capital campaigns, going back to the concept of small early wins or more reasonable goals. I've talked to several heads about strategic plans and how they don't want these big, glossy 5-year, massive, beautiful long horizon goals anymore, that they want them actually small early win goals for strategic plans. Same thing for capital campaigns. Also, another huge, initiative inside institutions that a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, but it is certainly more present in the marketplace now than before, of seeing campaigns broken into multiple phases. So phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And that is now where before very few campaigns that I would approach or hear schools going into to have that style and approach of phases. It's now becoming more and more common. Literally the past 3 clients I've talked to over the past month are all working on phased campaigns. I guess that's what I have to say today. Hopefully it makes some sense in my ramblings, tying it all together on a kind of a macro micro level approach. Questions, thoughts?
Oh, I think this, we've heard reverberations of the same themes now said from very different angles. And funny that you mentioned Atomic Habits, because on the forum I'm on, I just heard about the Atomic Habits for parenting, because he made a version for parenting. So I was like, okay, I think that's the sign that I better get this book now. I've heard about it twice within a day. But I think what you're talking about, also what we're saying, again, to use the analogy, it's kind of this it's like the analogy of parenting. It's so darn hard to be a father or a father of kids, in my case, 2 boys, because on one hand, you don't see the changes. It's only when you look at those pictures of like 5 years ago. So on day-to-day, you don't see the changes, but you have to commit to a coherent set of values and an ethos as to what you believe in. And you as a parent, you can only be true and authentic. You cannot play this double kind of I'm this but I do that kind of thing, because you can't do it. It's just too hard. You get too many cracks in the facade if you ever try to do that. And it's the same thing with strategy for me. It's like the 5-year goals. I totally resonated what you said of having like big 5-year concrete goals. What I see more for strategy, and we had a round table around the importance of communication. Ultimately, strategy, in my opinion, is an exercise in alignment of effort. And in order to achieve that, you make sure everybody believes in a similar amount of things or a similar amount of core values. And then eventually everything comes together and you get those micro steps that then will result, when you look back, only when you look back, on massive changes. But when you're in it, it's frighteningly and frustratingly slow.
And Claire, points out a good metaphor for that is that you don't start out, if you want to run a marathon, you don't say, I'm going to be a marathon runner. You start out to be a runner. You run first before you run until you complete a marathon, right? It's simple. I mean, there's no new great idea, right? It's all been said before, but it's really the practice of the good ideas is the hard part, right? The discipline to do what we all know is so obvious. Is doing the obvious is hard.
So yeah. So look, we still have time for the fireside chat afterwards, and we can just have a bit of a free-flowing conversation. But I would just like to give George a chance to wrap this up and then close the recording so that we are within our approximately 1 hour time slot there. And we have a few more kind of announcements that we'd like to share with you.
Thanks, Christoph. And I'd like to thank the panelists that have been with us today. It was a fascinating presentation. It is, really interesting how, the same themes came out from each of our panelists, but from a different perspective, and it really reinforces the importance. So thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you to the people who joined us this morning. As Christoph said, this recording will be available, and we know we've had several requests already for a link to the recording. So that will be something that will be made available to folks in the coming days. Just a couple of other announcements. I just wanted to give a plug to the NEASC annual conference. It's going to take place on the 1st and 2nd of December in Boston. It is an in-person conference, and the theme of the conference is building community and resilient leadership. Just thinking about how we've all been kind of splintered apart over the last few years as a result of the pandemic and the restrictions that we've been living under. And so just a really good opportunity to come back together again as an educational community and focus on the need for resilient leadership, the need to really provide leaders with the tools to be effective and to deal with the myriad different challenges that we're facing in education today. Also wanted to let you know about our next strategy roundtable discussion. It will be on November 15th, again from 10 to 11:30. And as Christoph mentioned earlier in the roundtable today, we're going to focus on loose versus tight leadership styles in a strategic context. And I think it will be a really fascinating look at different leadership styles and how each can be effective in its own way. So we hope that you'll be able to join us, and we hope that you'll spread the word about our strategy roundtable discussions. We have some resources available, and this PowerPoint will be made available as well. So you'll have an opportunity to look into some of these resources. So with that, I'm going to close. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to stop the recording so that we can